Good evening, folks. This is Eddie Carson, and you're listening to the show Race Matters. We're here at WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3 FM. And I'm excited about the show tonight. I'm excited about the show for a lot of reasons. To be honest with you, our show tonight, we're going to delve into the topic of white supremacy culture here in New England. And I think I got someone who's super qualified to help me pontificate about this narrative of white supremacy culture here. I'm going to ask her to introduce herself. I will say, she's a friend, she's a colleague, she's a comrade. She's done some amazing stuff, particularly in the war, the battle against white supremacy, and thinking about what will it take for us to wholly subscribe to notions of being an anti-racist society, and we are far, far away from that. Henceforth, the reason why we're talking about this topic today. Sherry, what's going on, my friend?
Eddie, thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you. I'm really excited to be here.
I hope you are. I'm excited to have you.
I am.
Hey,
Yeah.
So Sherry, I want to start off by just letting folks know a little bit about yourself and everything. Share only what you want to share.
All right, so my name is Sherry Frost. I grew up not too far from here in Peabody, Massachusetts. My family moved us to Exeter, New Hampshire when I was in high school, and I've lived pretty much in that neighborhood ever since. I graduated from the University of New Hampshire with a master's degree and a CAGS. I teach high school mostly, but I've also taught college level courses. The kids who think they hate school are my favorite kids. Yeah. I'm also finishing my third term as Dover's Ward 4 representative in the New Hampshire House of Representatives.
And that's something we definitely got to chime into, because I think you have some stories about folks who are not super excited about your campaign and make us an anti-racist society.
I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So Sherry, we first met, I don't know, help me out, 2009, I want to say. I mean, it was a long time ago, and I was still living back down in the South when we first developed this relationship.
It may even have been earlier than that, I think. Yeah, we've known each other for a long time.
For a while, I have to do some research and everything, too, and it's crazy because I haven't seen you in a couple of years.
Well, have we seen anybody in a couple of years?
That's fair. That pandemic will do that to a lot of folks in so many ways. You know, when I was living down south, I was working at a what I would call a right-wing school, and most people were sitting there thinking, someone actually in a right-wing school employed you. And the funny thing, of course, was super popular, got stuff done. Was I controversial? Well, I mean, if you're about telling the truth, and I'm a truth teller, then you're going to be controversial. That's just going to be the reality. And Sherry, I know you are all about telling the truth and everything. When I decided to move to Massachusetts, you're one of the folks I reached out to first, asked questions. Better yet, I mean, you picked me up from the airport. You let me stay in your home while I was up here for my interview. You took me out to dinner with your family during that particular time. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Delightful.
I remember us rolling into Portsmouth, and I was like, man, what is this place? This is great. Having a little pizza dinner. I can't remember if it was like the Gaslight or whatever it's called, or flatbread pizza.
Flatbread. I took it to flatbread.
It was flatbread pizza right there.
That's my favorite.
At this. Oh, they should pay me for giving them a little free advertisement and everything here too. But part of the issue, of course, was the fact that when I was coming up here, I remember taking care of business back home down south, getting rid of stuff, going to different places. I remember talking to someone down south, and I sat there and I said, well, I'm about to move up north. I'm headed to Massachusetts. And this person said to me, and I'll never forget it. He said, why would you move to New England? There are a bunch of racists up there. And remember now, folks, I'm coming from the deep South, living in Arkansas, Texas, and in Alabama during that time. And this brother sat there and he was terrified for me, essentially questioning my decision-making about moving to a white supremacist culture such as New England, especially in a state like Massachusetts that has this particular this lens, I should say, of being this uberly progressive area, and that's the way things are seen. So I make that trek all the way up here. I don't know, it took me like over 20-something hours to get here. It's probably one of the most impressive things that's not on my curriculum vitae. I must admit that, right? A U-Haul carrying a carrying the farm, my cats, my dog, having towing a car up here and everything, moving a whole hood up into this particular area. And then when I got here, it's interesting. The perception of New England from outsiders is that this is this uberly progressive liberal area. But yet I got here and I discovered that there are a lot of vestiges that you find in the deep South when we talk about white supremacy culture up here that blew my mind. Help me understand this white supremacy culture from your lens, and what does that look like?
Well, I think a big part of it is that we largely don't examine our culture. We have we're told this narrative in schools, and, we tell each other that we are the North, right? And everybody in the North, we were the cradle of abolitionism, and, we fought on the right side, and, and I think where we fall down, where we fail, is that we don't actually learn our true history. And so one of the things that I do when I teach my early American history class is I ask the students where they think the first colony to codify slavery was. Wow. And of course they're like, Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina. I'm like, no, babies, it was the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yes.
The Massachusetts Bay Colony, in their body of liberties, said, and I quote, "There shall never be any bond slavery, villanage, or captivity, amongst us, unless it be lawful captives taken in just wars, and such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us." This is 1641, right? The very first people to put slavery into their constitution at the time were the people of Massachusetts Bay. And, despite the fact that the colonies and then later the states in the Northeast abolished slavery fairly early on in the game, we still did a thumping business.
It was like, 1680, I think, in Massachusetts when slavery was abolished, but yet still, even, I think it was 1680 or 1683, something like that. Yeah. And yet over a period of time, we came to discover that that wasn't actually true, because many of those folks had to kind of live out their adulthood still being enslaved in different ways.
Well, it's not so much, I don't so much focus on that as I focus on the economics of slavery, right? So, our region isn't well suited to mass agriculture. When the colonists got here, they realized we've got timber, great timber. Go to any town in New England and you will find a mast road. I live on a mast road. There are reasons that those things are called mast roads, right? By the time the colonists had come over, England had completely decimated its forests. We were literally cutting down masts for ships, right? So we're making money on timber. We're shipbuilders.
Newburyport, very complicit in the slave trade.
Yep. Think about New York, right? The financial districts, insurance, financing, all of that. What do you see on pretty much every major river in New England? You see these old brick buildings, these old mills, right? These mills needed raw materials. They needed cheap raw materials. Where were they getting them from? Right?
Deep South.
That's right.
Migrating that cotton up here to
That's
be
right.
produced and shipped out.
That's right. So while we may be famous for, I put famous in quotes, for being loudly abolitionists, we were also, as the book I brought you, we were also very complicit in both the slave trade and the economics of slavery, because of all of the things, the systems that were included in that practice.
It's interesting in that book. I want to highlight this book for folks. It's how the North promoted, prolonged, and profited from slavery. And I love, in all caps here at the bottom, complicity, being complicit. And so we talk about this origins of New England and the fact that the genesis of white supremacy culture in many ways was manifested here, not in my hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, not just in the Deep South, because again, we could talk all day about white supremacy now, and that's too easy to pick on the Deep South. But I want to spend our time here and everything. And when I got here, the irony, of course, is, when I think about the fact that white supremacy is ubiquitous, and that's something that we know. It's grand in so many ways. I've essentially I've evaluated this dichotomy of white supremacy culture up here. On one hand, you have folks who want to emulate the Deep South, folks who want to ride around in their with their Confederate flags and their pickup trucks and their guns and all of that stuff. Folks told me that New Hampshire, and I heard this when I got here, New Hampshire is the Mississippi of the North in so many ways. Some folks will say, well, no, but Mississippi's a blue state. It's kind of a purple state. And we can go on and on and on about that debate too. So you have that population of folks who want to live free or die as the motto for New Hampshire in so many ways. Then you have the other side of this, right? The other side of this dichotomy. It would be unfair if I didn't pick on white liberals who live up here. And I'm hard on liberals, particularly white liberals who are complicit in a sense that, to your point, right? We're on the right side of history. We're fighting against slavery. We promoted the abolitionist movement, all of those things. But in actuality, when you do a deep dive, especially into white liberal culture here, and I want us to stay here just for a second, you find folks who say all the right things and try to be, polite, genteel, if I can use that word, about issues of race. But in actuality, sometimes they can be the first ones to become fearful. Oh, Jennifer, black folks moved into the neighborhood. They're talking about race and CRT in our schools. We don't need that stuff here because we live in a land of not live or die or freedom, but the land of whiteness.
That's right.
And white people subscribe to that. I'm talking about good, in quotes, air quotes here, white liberals.
That's right. And again, that comes back to a life unexamined, right? I remember being in the House and I was seated in the last row of Democrats, so there were a bunch of Republicans behind me. And
this is in New Hampshire.
This is in New Hampshire. 400-member legislature. It's madness. And one of the men behind me they were having a conversation, about race and racism and whatever. I have no idea how they got on the topic, but I caught we can't be racist here. And I'm like, Now keep in mind, it's me. Sitting next to me is a man of Latino descent, and then a white man, and then an African-American woman, right? This is the four of us in this row. And I'm listening as this guy's going on and on and on about how we can't be racist, and I'm watching my seatmate get tenser and tenser, right? And this guy's logic is that we can't possibly be racist because we're like 99% white.
Oh, yes.
And I usually don't do this. I usually don't engage them because nothing good comes from it. But I twisted in my seat and I turned to him and I said, you know why we're 99% white? Because we're really good at being flipping racists.
Oh, I like that. So you can't leave us hanging here. You say a little bit more.
Right? Like the idea that all of this, these vast swaths of heterogeneous communities is an accident is absolutely ludicrous.
Sundown towns exist up here just like they existed in the Deep South. And for you folks who don't know what a sundown town is, essentially, these are signs that said, essentially, if you're a person of color, you need to get out before the sun goes down or life won't be good for you.
That's right. That's right. And New Hampshire was also the site of a race riot. I have to check the date. I'm a terrible history teacher. I remember events, but not dates. 1835, the Noyes Academy in Canaan, New Hampshire.
So this is new to me. I don't know this.
Yep. The Noyes Academy was a newly integrated school, was only the second in the country, founded by abolitionists with 28 white and 14 black students. The African-American students came from all over the Northeast. They traveled long distances to come to this school. And essentially, the people of Canaan rioted. The white people of Canaan rioted.
Because there were 14 black folks.
Because there were black students going to school with white students. Burn the place to the ground.
Can't have our little white girls congregating, hanging out with
That's right.
black men, because we know they are predacious and all kind of things, all kind of adjectives that were probably used.
Yeah, but this isn't, we can't teach this in school because this is what's called divisive concepts. So that's another thing. So, good Lord, the anti-CRT bills that have been, promulgated across the country, New Hampshire, a couple of them came to New Hampshire as well, and they had their hearings when we were having our hearings remotely online because of COVID. And the New Hampshire legislature set up this system whereby people could log into the House website, put in their name, their address, and choose drop-down menus. Which committee are you looking at? Which bill do you want to testify on? And then you could click, I support or I oppose this bill. And at the end, that generated data, right? So when the anti-CRT bill, CRT, I hate using that term, when that bill came up, I don't have the numbers in my head, but it was incredibly lopsided. It was like 5,000 people showed up online to oppose this bill, and like 28 people supported it.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
Crazy.
I'm actually surprised.
Crazy ratio. And the Republicans, knowing how bad it would look for them to force it through the regular channels, stuck it in the budget. So it is now law in New Hampshire.
So you can't teach critical race theory in the state of New Hampshire.
Well, critical race theory wasn't being taught in New Hampshire anyway.
Right, yeah. It's perplexing.
Well, this is the other thing. Let's stop using their language. We're giving them a legitimacy they don't deserve. Critical race theory was not being taught in New Hampshire. Some true history was being taught in New Hampshire, and that's what they objected to. That, abortion and school vouchers all made it into the budget, which the governor happily signed in the dark of night one Friday afternoon after a news dump.
Sununu.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the commissioner of education, one Frank Edelblue, who is, I'm not going to say anything.
Say what you want to say, my friend.
Nope, I'm not going to say it. He set up a website whereby parents could report teachers. Mm-hmm. And a concerned women's group set up a bounty, $500 per teacher. You report a teacher, and if it turns out that they're doing something they're not supposed to do, you get a reward.
I mean, that sounds like slavery. The rewards for folks who are harboring slaves and hunting people down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, some of those are vestiges of that former white supremacy culture that continues to manifest itself today.
Yep. But circling back to your concern about white liberals, that has been for me the biggest frustration. We've got the Proud Boys, and we've got the random racists, and we've got the Confederate. It's hysterical to see a Confederate flag on a truck with a New Hampshire tag on it.
It's kind of like, can I just advertise my whiteness and my white supremacy? I mean, I don't even understand the history of this. So this flag really kind of, it symbolizes my whiteness.
It does, and that is actually the one benefit of it. It's a warning label.
Yes.
You know how to approach people like that. But anyway, we had an incident in the legislature a couple of months ago where a white Democratic representative repeatedly hurled the N-word at a young black activist.
A Democrat?
She's a Democrat, yeah. She's a Jewish Democrat, and that plays into the story. There had been some consternation earlier when a Latino Democrat, also a woman, had posted something in support of Palestine, and that it blew up. It was madness.
Because you can't be anti-Israel
Apparently.
I mean, I can be anti-American before I can be anti-Israel.
Well, and one of the things that I emphasize with my students is that objection to a government is not the same as objection to a people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So I am anti-Israeli government.
Yes.
I am not anti-Israeli or anti-Jewish. And the idea that we're conflating criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism is something that I have a really big problem with. But that was sort of ancillary to what happened in this instance. It happened in the halls of the State House. She said the N-word multiple times. I didn't see the tape. I wasn't there when it happened. But she has yet to apologize for it. She is still a member of the House of Representatives. I do not know whether or not the Ethics Committee has made a decision about this incident, but it seems to me that a whole bunch of my colleagues have just decided we're going to move on. And when it first came down, this is sort of getting back to your idea of the white liberal, the thing that enraged me the most was people that I thought I knew better than I obviously did were all like, well, what was the context? What was happening?
There's no context that justifies the usage of this.
None. There is no context. To say nothing of the imbalance of power, right? We've got a sitting representative and a member of the public. We've got she's not old, but she's an older white woman and a young black man. Like, the imbalance of power, just that alone should have been enough, right? But there is absolutely no context. But dozens of my colleagues were like, oh, I'm not going to pass judgment. I want to wait and see the tapes. I'm like, in what context would this be okay?
But clearly they justified it. And that's what they're doing. Again, going back to the title of this book, right? In the reality of being complicit in behavior and thinking it's okay. So much so that folks have created this sense that's really popular here in this country, which is called amnesia. People are quick to forget and don't recall. Or better yet, they don't understand why a person like you, Sherry, and others like you would make such a fuss or a big deal out of such a wrong that exists.
Why do you make everything about race?
Absolutely.
Why do you make everything about race? Because everything is about race.
Everything.
I was just having a conversation with my husband the other day. We were talking about wages, as we do, because we still have 2 adult children who live at home simply because they can't afford to move out. This, tiny little square of a house in my town just sold for $500,000. It's madness. And my husband made a point about the difference between the minimum wage and the tipped minimum wage. And I said, here's another example of where my white colleagues roll their eyes at me because I make a point every single time this comes up, is that the origins of the tip minimum wage are racist. So back in 1938, again, dates, not good with them, but when FDR was trying to push through the Fair Wage Act, a white Democrat, remember this is before the parties flipped.
Absolutely, political realignment.
A white Democrat named R. Mark Wilcox, Florida, got on the floor of the House, and I pulled up his speech. I have a copy of his speech. I read it verbatim to my students. It is absolutely we will not do this. You will not get our votes, right? This is something the states need to handle. We cannot have black men and white men being paid the same. And as a result of that resistance from Southern Democrats, the service industry and the agricultural industry were exempt from minimum wage laws. Now, who does service jobs? Who does agricultural work?
Absolutely.
Right? And that's still the case today. The kids who come up here from Jamaica, from, the American Virgin Islands, we get an influx of these students up here in the fall to pick apples. They're not being paid minimum wage. They're being paid by the bushel because they're exempt from minimum wage laws, right?
The perpetual reality of slavery and how it continues to exist. Folks, you're listening to WJOP Newbury Port, Joppa Radio 96.3 FM. When you were growing up, and thinking about this white supremacy culture in New England, What was your early memory, one of your early memories of race and racism up here? Did you grow up thinking that, well, this is the North, we are not racist, racism doesn't exist? And, when did that start? And when did you really start to realize that, you've been fed a bill of lies like most white people have?
Yeah. I definitely got that message in school. We got the whole, we were the North, we were the good guys message in school, especially in elementary school. My neighborhood was largely white. Our diversity was mostly religious. If you weren't Catholic or Jewish, you lived in my house. Once I got to Peabody High School, I was a Proposition 2.5 kid. So by the time I was ready for junior high, they had closed them all. So I did 7 years of elementary school and 5 years of high school. They just split the junior highs up. And when I got to the high school, that was really the first time that I had a class that wasn't all white. Like my entire elementary school class was white as the driven snow. Like we're all white people. My first experience, though, with that kind of overt racism, I will never, ever forget this. Again, I said that if you weren't Catholic or Jewish, you lived at my house, but my babysitter was a Presbyterian, maybe? A Baptist. Her dad was a Baptist preacher. And she would take me every once in a while to services. I was, 6, 7, maybe. And I go to Sunday school, and there's a family from, I think it was Chad, maybe? Central African family that had been sponsored by the church to immigrate to the United States. And I was playing with their little girl, the blackest person I'd ever seen at that point. Like I'd seen black people before. I'll tell you a story about my own family in a minute. But this child was just this gorgeous, she was just beautiful. And I was fascinated by her because,
Yeah, right. Never experienced, only on television, maybe,
right?
or in a
That's
book
right.
or a magazine.
That's right. And when we came out of Sunday school, this little girl's mother and father came to get her. And both of them had ritual scarring on their faces, which fascinated me. And her mother was beautiful. She was all done up in this, traditional dress and colorful and the head wrap and the whole thing. And I was just bowled over. And I was 7 years old. I didn't think it was rude. I asked her, can you tell me what and I touched my face. And what's that? And I was scolded by a member of the congregation.
Why?
We don't talk about things like that. You don't you.
Is this part of that colorblind ideology that's that's pervasive, particularly among white churches, but in white communities?
We're
that's
going
what you're
to
saying?
ignore. We're going to try to ignore the thing that makes them different.
Right.
Their job here is to integrate with us, not to be different.
So essentially to assimilate, to be white. And
That's
yet we know what happens when folks don't assimilate.
That's right.
There's white resistance that becomes paramount in so many ways. That's there.
Yep. And I remember being scolded by a man that I didn't even know. Yelled at me, grabbed me by the arm, and took me, removed from the situation, and scolded me.
So when did you get to a point where you became who you are now? Living up in this, what I would call pervasive white world, but yet to be someone who's an anti-racist, someone who is, lives in a home that teaches not tolerance, because we know the problem of tolerance.
But tolerance is a huge problem.
It is a massive, absolutely.
That's right.
But notions of radical love. When did you get to that point? Because again, it's not like it was preached in your hood, in your community.
It was not. I can't really tell you. I don't know how it happened. I have a very weird family on my mother's side, and my mother's older sister embraced the Nation of Islam in the 70s.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so she married. To my recollection, again, don't trust my childhood memories, but she married at least 2 African American men and had 3 black children who I just reconnected with them.
Congratulations.
Yes, it was
That's
wonderful.
pretty awesome.
I got a Facebook message from my cousin. I have this gorgeous photograph that I put it on my classroom wall whenever I have a classroom. It's of Tamara and myself in a laundry basket. We're on the floor. We're 5 maybe, and we both got our arms out the laundry basket, and we're just grinning like fools. And I just love that picture because it to me it symbolizes that whole, like, we're all in it together, like we're in the same boat. And all of a sudden, one afternoon, bing, I get this message from someone named Tamara, and I'm like, it can't be.
There you go, right
And
there.
it was. And it was.
That's
And it
so
was
awesome.
just delightful to reconnect to her. So, one thing that my family did right is there was always that sort of acceptance of difference. Let's call it difference.
Okay.
Right? I had black cousins. I had a homosexual uncle. I had a born-again Christian. We don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We don't celebrate Christmas. We definitely don't celebrate Halloween, kind of, right? So we just rolled with it. Where I got my, you could call it radicalism, I guess. I don't find it particularly radical, but where I got that, I think, is just my sense of empathy. Like, my rage is entirely in service to my compassion.
I love the way you frame that.
Like, I'm angry.
It's
My
a
hair's
quote of the week right there.
my hair is on fire all the time, but it's not because I'm angry. It's because I'm desperately sad. That things are the way they are.
But have you ever been accused of betraying your race, not understanding your identity as a white person?
Not by anybody that matters. Not by anybody that matters. I mean,
But folks who don't matter have done that.
oh, sure. You should see my Twitter feed.
Well, I mean, I will say I've seen some of the hate mail, and I have my share of that. I've seen some of the comments and posts, and I think even stumbled across something online where some folks were kind of taking shots at you too.
Yes.
For that.
Well, yes. So a bunch of years ago, my first term in the State House, it was discovered that a Republican representative was the moderator and originator of a viciously misogynistic website. I mean, viciously, like sewer pipe misogynistic website. It was horrible. And in an effort to get rid of me as well, when that person was sent for discipline, they attached me to that amendment and sent me for discipline as well because I swore on Twitter. And at one point, I made the observation that the United States does have a terrorism problem and that they're usually white Christian men.
Which, I mean, you think about it, over the last 10 years, and this is from the ADL, the ADL reported that over the last decade or so, most domestic extremism has come from white supremacist groups, and violence from those groups is up 54% from folks who are really campaigning to keep communities white.
Yep.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling. There's an SNL show, and I think it's probably one of the funniest SNLs I've ever seen. Outside of the one by Beyonce, which is probably my favorite one. I don't know if you ever saw that. I was like, Beyonce can't be black. She's one of us, right? From hip culture and whatever you want to call it. And it's SNL, they're at a Klan rally. And they're talking about we need to create a community of farmers where everyone's white, everyone works outside. We can have a community and this, and that. And someone said, oh, I know a place like that. It's called Vermont. and then the guy pushed back, but he said, no, but we want to create this different kind of community, where we white children and white this, and goes on going. And the guy goes, yeah, that place already exists. It's called Vermont. That's there, right? And then we know historically from the census that, Vermont,
Maine
and New Hampshire consistently are the whitest.
1, 2, and 3. We switch places sometimes, but we're all in the top 3. Yep.
And so then when I look at places like your home state of New Hampshire, and I guess your other home state of Massachusetts, these are states that they profess the sense of liberalism, but yet someone who is a white supremacist, Donald Trump. And we think about the Republican platform, and folks, I'm a black man in America, so that makes me political about everything I do. I have to be that way. It's interesting that still over 30% of people voted for such white supremacy in these areas. That number is just striking.
And they will tell you to your face that they're not racist. And I remember when Donald Trump was first nominated, a tweet came out, and I apologize for not being able to remember the originator of the tweet, but it was basically, you might not be racist, but you might not think of yourself as a racist, but you decided that racism wasn't a deal breaker.
Oh, that's
right?
good.
Right.
Yes.
It's in what we accept, what's okay, you know. I remember, so that I brought a bunch of, because I wanted to make sure I remember. There's some racial incidents at University of New Hampshire after the murders at the massage parlors.
Down in
a lot
Atlanta?
Of anti-Asian hate.
Yes.
Yep. But in my hometown of Dover, New Hampshire, I was a long-term substitute teacher at Dover High School, and one of the things that I was tasked with doing was teaching of mice and men. No, not of mice and men. Yes, of mice and men. Charlie and Lenny?
That's
Yeah.
yep,
Okay.
Charlie, yep, that's right.
Sorry, my brain hiccuped.
Nope.
So I spent 2 weeks before we even cracked the spine, right? We talked about the Jonesboro Boys. We talked about the Great Migration. We talked about Jim Crow. We talked about what the biggest threat to black men was. We talked about, economics and the Great Depression and the N-word. We talked about all of it. We spent 2 weeks reading the book. We did a couple of other things with it, and then my term was over. The woman who I was replacing had come back from maternity leave. A couple weeks later, there was an incident where students were recorded by another student doing I think it was a history class project that included students singing a racist song to to Jingle Bells, the KKK Jingle Bells incident, right? 2019, Dover High School students singing racist lyrics to the tune of Jingle Bells as part of a class assignment. The teacher who gave the assignment was put on paid leave while the district investigated. He has since been reinstated.
Of course.
I went to the listening session that the school board held the week after the story broke. And as I walked in, I was rushed by a bunch of my former students. Oh my God, Mrs. Frost, we need to talk about this. Nobody will talk to us about this. So I grabbed them and I pulled them into a hallway, and I'm like, all right, look, first of all, this is why I was freaked out about all your cell phones, right? Some of the conversations that I had with you, taken out of context, would have gotten me fired, right? We talked about difficult things, right? Not everybody can talk about those difficult things. Not everybody knows how to put to tie all of those strings together so that you can see the big picture stuff. I said, secondly, everybody's terrified right now. You say the wrong thing and you're going to end up like this guy, and nobody wants to be in the news, right? And so I gave them my cell phone number. I gave them my email address. A couple of them took me up on it, and we had a couple of really interesting conversations. But after that, we all went into the listening session, and it was one white person after another, going to the mic saying, this man is a good man. He loves his children. He's a good coach, and da-da-da-da-da, and you can't hold this against him, and da-da-da. And then I went home, and my kids were like, yeah, I had that teacher, and he gave me that assignment, and it was not okay. This is something he's been doing for years.
And this is just now coming to fruition back in 2019.
It happened in 2019, and he was reinstated the following school year.
And that's it.
Yep.
Right. And so you just move on.
Yep. We've just moved on.
So do you think places like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, we can say large parts of Massachusetts even, do you believe there is not a concern, and do you believe folks are not concerned by the pervasiveness of whiteness? In many ways, they take pride in the fact that these areas rank at the top every single year for being white. This is a way of white purity culture. which is another way of saying a form of white supremacy.
Form of white supremacy. I'm not sure that I would go that far. Again, a life unexamined, right? I think a lot of people just don't think about it.
But I always said, I know Socrates always talk about what it means to live a life, the unexamined life. But I think about the unexamined life is, I want to go back to this word. I think the unexamined life is a life of complicity.
Sure, it sure is, right? But a fish doesn't know it's wet, right? And so if your whole life is lived in white spaces, there's no impetus for you to examine why that is, then any kind of motivation to push you out of those spaces is going to feel uncomfortable, right? Which is where I think my white colleagues were coming from when they wanted context. Right? I want to understand why she did that. I want to understand what was going on and what made her feel like that was the right thing to do. It's because, and I think about this in the larger picture too. If you are comfortable where you are, if you feel like there is a place for you in whatever system you're in, you're not going to push the boundaries.
But would you say that system, particularly in New England, doesn't look so much like folks walking around with swastikas tattooed on their arms or wearing hoods like they're in the Klan? But in many ways, they're the bankers, they're the board members, they're 100%. The leaders of industry. They're creating a system in many ways to keep the status quo as is.
Yes, I absolutely think that. Are they doing that deliberately? Are they going to bed at night thinking, how can I maintain a racist system? That I'm not so sure about.
Really? I mean, we may have to disagree a little bit on that, because that goes back to the unexamined thing, because I have to think in many ways that folks, even white folks who don't realize that they too constitute a racial identity, are not that naive to not realize that they are creating they've existed in a system that they want to maintain of whiteness. I mean, I see things all the time, particularly as it relates to things such as, the gun culture up here, right? I see things such as, almost this Confederate culture, and people will say, oh, Brother Carson, you're not really talking about me. But I'm talking about the folks who endorse, embrace, and say, but that's okay, because, see, that is a part of their identity. And I say that's part of white identity in New England, which is frightening. I mean, oftentimes, it's rare, to be honest with you, for me, outside of the institution that I work at, the institution that I'm a dean at, that I see people who look like me. And then when I go to New Hampshire, and I go to all those other places, right? When I go skiing in some of those areas too, I'm like, man, I'm the only brother on this hill. And folks are probably critiquing like, well, why is he there? I mean, hasn't he looked around and figured it out?
Yep. But if you ask them about it, they'll tell you, oh, no, it's fine. It's that internal back of the mind sort of thing going on. Because again, like I said, if this is something that you are not confronted with, if this is not something that you stick your head up out of the, and look around, you're not going to see it. It's funny that you say that. My husband and my family and I were in Washington, D.C. Facebook Memories popped this up. And I had made a point that at one point we were the only white people in a restaurant.
Oh, welcome to my world.
And I was delighted by it. I was delighted by it because it had never happened to me before, right? Like, it was so unusual to be noteworthy, to be the only white person in a room. That never happens to me before.
Would you say New England is incestuous?
In what way?
I mean, incestuous in the sense that, folks who were born here, who lived here, they perpetuate these notions of white culture because it's the only thing they know. They haven't left their particular communities.
Maybe.
It's become comfortable to them. And part of that comfort, of course, is this idea that, I'm around folks who are just like me and who look like me.
Maybe. Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Should I be afraid to live up here among these northern New England liberals? among even the white supremacists who subscribe to notions of white supremacy? Should I be nervous? Because, I've got to make a decision eventually, and that is, do I return to the Deep South where I face layers of white supremacy, or do I continue to contend with what I contend with every single day, which is a notion of whiteness? Folks see me, they tripping over themselves trying to get a good look at me. Folks oftentimes asking me, are you visiting here? You must be on vacation. Oh, I can't tell you how often I hear that, especially right here in Newburyport.
I can't say. I mean, the part of me that loves you
Well, I like that.
would warn you to be very careful, right? I mean, in the last, I've seen it in the last, right, since Obama,
Yes.
right? A big increase in hate groups. One of the things that I brought as a note is the prevalence of the Proud Boys. We've got lots of Proud Boys in New Hampshire. They're making it their big thing right now to harass school boards, but they're harassing school boards because of what they think of as multiracial teaching, right? Teaching people that we weren't all this spun sugar candy and sweetness all the time. In terms of racial violence, we're not immune to that either.
So you're saying I should be nervous? Because some people would say I'm safer living back down in Alabama than I am up here.
I can't really say. I mean, I'm thinking in the back of my head, I'm thinking about the little 8-year-old boy who was nearly hanged a couple of years ago.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah.
I remember
in
that.
Claremont, I think.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then a couple of years ago, a white woman in my town in Dover was convicted of violating the First Amendment, the civil rights of a 9-year-old. I think he was 9 or 11, a 9-year-old black child, for hurling a racial slur at him and threatening to kneel on his neck. Right. So there's been in the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, certainly a breaking down of that gentility that you referred to earlier in our discussion about, what we say behind closed doors and how we behave out in public.
But so with that though, and again, this is not a fair question, but I'm curious, just an opinion, right? Do you believe there are white households up here, even in liberal white households, that subscribe to the notion that people of a different color should be segregated, that we don't want to integrate in any particular way? And the language may be a little different in those households, but people will talk about it in our household, but they'll go out and be all polite and public about racial issues.
Maybe. I can't say, because what kind of conversations happen in my household.
That's true.
So.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just one of those things I'm curious about, because even for me, living up here, it's interesting. I've seen black people who've internalized white supremacy in order to assimilate in so many ways, which is just problematic to me. And that Tomness just drives me crazy. I watch white people formulate this racial identity that I do call a New England racial identity because of the nature of interracialness, even during the age of segregation, Jim Crow in the Deep South, that never existed here. White people don't know, nor can they fully comprehend, what does it really look like or mean to exist in a community where there are other people who are, and to use your word, who are different from them. And that's just a struggle that exists.
That's right. Because we are so heterogeneous. Yeah. And that unexamined life, that idea that we are not pushed to consider, how what we do perpetuates, supports, how we benefit from it too. Like whenever I have conversations with my students about this, I inevitably get, because I teach at-risk kids, right? My favorite kids are the kids who think they suck at school. And we'll have these conversations about race, about privilege, and I'll inevitably get, I'm not privileged. My family's been dirt poor for generations, and that's absolutely true, right? That there's grinding poverty here. It's we've got a problem with education equity, and it's not about race, it's about class.
But white folks love to
Right.
go to other things in order to deflect away from race and to separate race and class.
That's right.
Just you can't do that.
That's right. But what I end up doing is trying to get them to understand that, yes, your life has been hard. It has not been hard because you are white.
I like that.
Right? And the problem that I run into is that they don't have anything to identify themselves against. Because, like me, they went from kindergarten to until they got to me in all white environments.
But what would you say to folks who will say, but Sherry, this is not my fault?
No, of course it's not.
I grew up in a white area, white community, or no people of color up here. So why are we having these conversations? All of this stuff.
That's where I start getting frustrated, right? Of course it's not your fault. We're not talking about fault. We're not talking about blame, right? We're talking about education. We're talking about awareness, right? Once you understand how you participate in these systems, how you benefit from these systems, how other people are taken down and oppressed and held back by these systems, then you have a responsibility to do something about it.
But I just want to live my life. I want to be just an average, normal white person. I don't want to think about these things. I don't want to think about whiteness. I just want to pay my bills and live my life and go to school, go to work, do those things. And Sherry, you're making too big of a fuss. You're teaching students about this stuff, asking them to think about these things. Mm-hmm. But why does it matter? You're the problem, Sherry. Mm-hmm. If people like you would stop talking about this stuff, then we don't really have a problem. We're perfectly safe and comfortable in our New England whiteness in the way that it exists.
That is exactly the argument. And one of the things I love is probably once a semester, because my hair's on fire all the time, you know this.
Literally.
Probably once a semester, a student will come up to me and go, Mrs. Frost, what is your problem? Right? And they'll start listing my privilege. You're a white lady, you're middle class, you're straight, you're married, you speak English, you get to vote, you're never going to need an abortion, you're not an immigrant. Why do these things matter to you? Right? Like, I paid off all my student loans. Good Lord, let's have a conversation about the student loan debt, right?
Absolutely.
All these things matter to me because they matter to my neighbors. Oh. Because we live in community, right? And I'm definitely somebody who believes that my life gets better when your life gets better, right? So if I'm living in a community of people who are sufficiently housed, who are sufficiently nourished, who are well-fed, right? Who are getting good quality education, who are working in jobs that meet their skill level and are meeting their financial needs, right? Then my neighborhood gets better.
But yet
happier people make safer neighborhoods.
Right. But then I go back to this other notion too, that back to why you make a big deal about this, you're fussing about this stuff is not worth a conversation and everything. And yet, be it California, be it Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, or Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, it is my contention that white people don't care about black people. We are the problem. White folks will say, well, if you stop talking about discrimination, if you work a little harder, if you stop acting, I don't know, the way you people act and that kind of stuff, then these things wouldn't be such an issue at all. And yet when I hear, and we've heard that stuff, I can't help but contend that white people still struggle to care about people of color.
Racism is not a black person's problem. Racism is a white person's problem.
But you talk to some white folks about it, they'll say it's not my problem because I've never done anything racist. I'm just sitting here and I'm complicit to a system that I don't even believe is a problem nor exists.
I don't understand it exists. The life unexamined.
Oh, right? I'm going to make that my mantra for
Circles
such a long period of
back,
time. It
right?
really does.
Right.
It really does.
Right. And I think the objection to teaching this stuff, right? The objection to giving students something to think, to actually think. This is one of the things that drives me mad. We say we want agile critical thinkers, but we really don't.
Oh, of course
because
not.
Agile critical thinkers challenge the status quo. They challenge the people in power, and they demand answers that the people in power aren't always able or willing to give them. And so when I teach that Massachusetts was the first colony to enshrine slavery in its charter, the kids go home and they tell their parents that. right? And that bumps right up against but we're New Englanders, we're the good guys, right? When I talk about the idea of, descriptive laws, the idea that we very rarely write laws for things that don't exist.
Right, absolutely.
Right. And then I start talking about the black codes.
Yes.
Right. And after the uprising in South Carolina,
Stono?
I think it was Stono. After Stono, Massachusetts put in a whole bunch of black codes, even though Massachusetts had already abolished slavery, right? Because they were terrified of their black population. And, I'm always, I always sort of circle around to these sorts of ideas that, what are the people in power afraid of? Mm-hmm. They're afraid that if the people that they've been abusing for so long get power, that they will be abused in the same way. Right? It's a total lack of imagination, a complete failure of imagination on their part.
So, folks, you're listening to Race Matters here at WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3. Can New England change?
Of course it can. Absolutely, of course it can. Everything can change.
And I like that about you because, for me and people who know me, I'm not an optimistic person. I'm hopeful, but I am not optimistic whatsoever. I believe that under capitalism, white supremacy will continue to generate the problems and the sins that it has generated. Mm-hmm. And the reality is white folks are going to be perfectly comfortable with the status quo and the normality of whiteness that exists. Mm-hmm. And because of that, right, I can't be optimistic that things will change. It's not going to change in the Deep South. There's an interesting white power dynamic that's happening. We've seen going back to the 2016 election that even Republicans generated this fear that, oh my goodness, right, white people, the white race is starting to disappear. And we've got to control these things. And white people are hearing this stuff. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of people like me. They're definitely afraid of white people like you. Mm-hmm. I think about that soul brother, James Reeb, mm-hmm. who went down to fight the battles in 1965 in Selma, right? Mm-hmm. He died for the soul of black folks, but yet he terrified white people. There is nothing more frightening than a white person willing to preach and tell white people that they have a problem, mm-hmm. and yet white people don't want to hear nor listen to that. And because of it, I can't move past the fact that I hear institutions subscribing to, we want to be anti-racist, until you ask them to do this. Oh, well, we don't want to be that kind of anti-racist.
the walk and the talk, right? The difference between the walk and the talk. Yeah. But I do think we can change. I do. I think it's about education. I think it's about being clear about what it is exactly we're talking about. I think it's being truthful, right? I think it's about being empathetic and compassionate. I think it's about recognizing that there's more than one way to live, right? I think it's about recognizing that more for you does not necessarily mean less for me, right? Our culture teaches scarcity. Mm. If I give you rights, then that's going to mean somehow that my rights are taken away. Remember when we were debating homosexual marriage, right? Somehow the lesbians down the street getting married is going to somehow demean my marriage?
But it limits folks thinking of procreation of whiteness.
How does that happen, right? I mean, so we've got a whole big long history, and as you know, as a reader of history, there were so many places where if we had just made a different choice, things could have been so much different, right? But here we are, and every inflection point is a place to make a different choice.
So in our final few minutes here, and time just flew by super fast. This
so much fun.
It always. When I look at a state like New Hampshire, for example, some people say New Hampshire is blue now, it's purple, it's whatever it is. And thinking about the political landscape, mm-hmm. and you've already kind of talked about that just a little bit. Decisions with midterm elections coming up, a presidential election coming up, are really going to be designed to protect whiteness. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you look at a state like Florida, for example, and you got a person of color who's internalized white supremacy, right? I don't even want to mention DeSantis on here. Oh, I just said his name. I can't stand him, right? That's there and everything too. What's the future of New Hampshire looking like?
I am very edgy about the future of New Hampshire. We have a group that call themselves the Free State Project. They're a bunch of, they call themselves libertarians. I say they call themselves because I don't know that they actually ascribe to any particular ideology beyond that taxes are bad and guns are good. They are actively recruiting like-minded people to move to New Hampshire and to run for office, and they're being very successful at it. I mean, this term, we literally debated a bill about New Hampshire literally seceding from the Union.
That is crazy. I haven't heard about that.
It is absolutely crazy. And the fact that you haven't heard about it makes me absolutely insane, because the news should be screaming about this. We should know the names of all of the sponsors. We should know the names of all of the people who voted for it. But the New Hampshire legislature put forth a bill to secede from the Union, to become our own little country.
So those folks, I'm just going to go ahead and call them stupid right here, because, you know, one of the things I struggle with people is I struggle with stupidity. And don't those idiots know that question has already been answered, and it was concluded in 1865 that a state can't do that. You can't do that.
That's right. That's right. But they did it anyway.
And they're wasting their time. People are paying people to do this stuff.
Not much, but yes.
But still, to sit around.
$100 a year before taxes. But my point is, there is a large and growing population, a large and growing community in my state that is actively anti-government, anti-civil society, anti-statehood.
Sounds like a breeding ground for hate groups, extremists, and white supremacy.
Yes, sir, it does.
That's frightening. So last thing, and I want an honest answer from you here as we bring the show to a close here. I got to make a decision. Do I move back down to the Deep South, or do I stay here? As a black man, where's your confidence level in a radical brother who's a thinker, who's an intellectual, who's an activist, who believes in radical love, who's not afraid to preach the gospel of truth and love, and who believes in interracial companionship in so many ways? What should I do, Sherry?
You should stay right here.
I should stay here?
We need you.
You need me? Yep. Am I safe here?
Yep. We need you.
I tell you what, you know, one of the things that has not, the South has probably a slight advantage over New England is, and I know, and this is true for all folks, I don't care if you're black, brown, indigenous, white, Asian, the cost of living is crazy up here.
Yeah, it is.
It is insane,
Yep.
but I should stay here.
You should stay here. Yep, that's my professional and my personal answer.
All right. See, I don't trust your personal answer because we have a bit of a relationship.
Because you know how much I love you. That's right.
I know how much you love me on this too.
That's right.
Folks, I'm glad you were able to chime in to Race Matters here. I'm excited that we had our guest Sherry Frost here, who's just insightful, brilliant, and just brought a lot of honesty and truth to the conversation too. I hope you'll reach out to me if you have any thoughts and opinions. And I hope you're taking this show seriously. I hope you're sitting there and you're thinking about your own sense of racial identity. And I hope it's not subscribed in this in the annals of, well, gee, you know, Eddie's always picking on white people. He's bringing on these thinkers and these different folks who want to make me feel bad about my whiteness, until what Sherry said early. This is not about fault. This is not about blame, but this is about being active and doing something to change communities and educating yourself. And that's what we try to do here on this show. You know, I can't go out in that way. Sherry, I'm going to give you the final word as we wrap this show up. What would be your final thought, whatever that may be on your mind?
Let your rage be fueled by your compassion.
I love it. I love it. A lot of quotes here. Folks, thanks for chiming in to Race Matters. Again, it was exciting to have you on another show. We'll see you next time. Take care.